Welcome, everybody. My name is Barbara Grosh. I'm with the League of Women Voters. I'm the Director of Voter Services, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this webinar. Ready to rock. Welcome, everybody. Let me give you a 1-minute welcome to the League of Women Voters and tell you a little about us. We are direct descendants of Susan B. Anthony and Carrie Chapman Catt, who worked for 70 years to get women the right to vote. And the League was started immediately when women got the right to vote in 1920, because they knew that just having the right to vote didn't mean that women would be powerful, that women had to learn to use the ballot. They had to learn how to register, how to vote, how to know who to vote for. So that's been our mission for 101 years now, is helping voters get registered, learn how to vote, and actually get out and vote. So that's why we're here today, because we've got elections coming up in Monroe County and we're worried about voter turnout. We have a co-sponsor tonight, the Zeta Beta Phi sorority, the Psi Omega Zeta chapter. So I'd like to give a minute to Carla Facey to say hello to you. Carla, do you want to open your camera? There you go. Unmute yourself. Say hello.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carla Facey, and I'm humbled to be a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Psi Omega Zeta chapter. I'm also the social action chairperson for our chapter. Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated was founded on the campus of Howard University on January 16, 1920. Our sorority's international programs serve to empower people from all walks of life through mind, body, and spirit, while directly affecting positive change through the different programs and services that we do in the community. Our local chapter, Psi Omega Zeta, will be celebrating 10 wonderful years of being chartered on June 24th, 2021. And our members continue to be committed to service initiatives as well as opportunities to educate our community. Some of our chapter members are here with us this evening. Hi, Soros. We are super excited to be partnering with another hardworking, community-based, nonpartisan organization, the League of Women Voters, Rochester metro area, to discuss the topics in this much-needed webinar series about voting. There are some amazing panelists. We are super excited about that. So on behalf of my chapter president, Sora Joyce Aqua, my sisters of Psi Omega Zeta chapter, and myself, we would like to thank the board of directors, especially Ms. Barbara Grosh, for collectively planning with our sorority sister, Myra Washington, to make this possible. And everyone at the League of Women Voters, Rochester metropolitan area for partnering with us once again. And to all of you for joining us this evening from the comfort of your home or whatever space you're in, we extend very warm greetings to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. All right, now I'm going to ask our panelists to unmute themselves and let their cameras rip. So my co-host this evening is Ricardo Adams. I just called him out of the blue when I started working on this and started picking his brain on who we should get to be on this series of webinars. And I hope he'll be here in a moment. So I enjoyed working with him so much, putting the list together, that I asked him to co-host with me and help me interrogate these wonderful panelists we've brought on. So tonight I've got Melanie Funchess. Melanie, I still think of her as the face of the Mental Health Association of Rochester, but she has moved on to greener pastures now, and she's a freelance human being and a free range human being, and we're awfully glad we have her in our community. And we've got Angie Perez-Delgado, and Angie is the CEO at the Ibero-American Action League in Rochester. Okay, so let me kick this off by throwing some questions at you. So the year is 2021. So last year was a big year for elections. Everybody knew there was an election last year because it was a presidential election. But in the year following presidential elections, we just have local elections, and the turnout is dramatically worse. I actually have a slide to show that. I can't resist. Let me see where I got it and I'll share it. Yes, so let me share screen. So just to give people a sense of what the stakes are in this election. So looky here, folks. In the city of Rochester, we've got about 110,000 registered voters. Last year, about 72,000 of them turned out to vote. It was about the same, little bit higher than 4 years ago. But look at these mayoral years, okay? The year after the last presidential election, 2017, there were 20,000 people in the primary and 30,000 people who voted in the general election. So that is the election that elects the mayor, half the city council, half the school board. This year around, it's going to be the entire county ledge. That's not true every year of local elections. So share your thoughts with me about why it is that so few people know that there's an election and turn out to vote in these local elections. What do you think?
Well, before we even do any of that, I'd like to take this moment to honor the family of George Floyd in light of what happened yesterday. And I want to just say out loud that what we saw yesterday was not justice, it was accountability. And that just like voting, we have a lot of work to do. Voting is part of that, but I just want us to make sure that we acknowledge this in all of our spaces, because it has been a long time coming, but it's just the first in many steps to liberation. So I want to say that. In terms of the voting, why people don't come out, I don't think people really understand that all politics is local. And that because we talk about the president. Every time we talk about something, we talk about the president, but we don't understand that the school board, the city council, the mayor, the for God's sake, the district attorney, right? These people, the judges, these are the races that deeply impact our day-to-day lives. And, and I don't think people really see that as much, because we hear about, like, everyone talked about the stimmy, right? The stimulus that came out. Stimmy came from the federal government, but we're not talking about the billions of dollars that's about to hit our community by the same stimmy, right? So I think it's about educating our community and us understanding what impacts us from day to day.
Yeah, I would agree. I also think it's a lot of people, don't feel that their vote really makes a change. So I think that that's another mentality that we have to break through. I think when people look at decisions that are being made, I know I've had many conversations with people on the street, and they'll say, well, why should I vote? My vote doesn't count. And that's something that I think as a community, we need to do better. And I think because of the intensity of our presidential election, I think that has shifted about how important it is to vote, and one vote it will count. So hopefully we'll see a higher turnout in local. It will be interesting, right? If we see a higher turnout in local elections because of all of the education that we needed to do for the presidential election. And, there was a lot that happened in Georgia with the Senate. So hopefully those things will trickle as to it's just as important to vote locally as in this federal elections.
Right. So I'm going to pause for a moment and say something I should have said in my introduction. If you are listening to us on Zoom, you can put questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. If you're listening to us on Facebook, you can put them into the comment thread and they'll get relayed to the panelists that way. So go ahead and share your questions. We'd love to hear from you. Melanie, I'm glad you mentioned George Floyd. That's certainly been on my mind an awful lot. And what you said about the fact that the work is not done, I mean, that is totally obvious to us here in Rochester, right? Because we had our own George Floyd in the form of Joe Prude, and we saw that justice was not done.
Daniel.
Sorry, Joe Prude, brother of Daniel Prude.
Yeah.
Yes, so we know that the work is not done. In fact, the third webinar in this series is going to be about police accountability in Rochester. So we'll be going through some of the blocks that are in the way to change happening there. So that's certainly an issue that we think should help people decide that it's worth their time to vote. Angie, I'm glad you mentioned that people think their vote doesn't count. And, you know, this is something I can understand because, you know, like in a presidential election, there's 150 million voters. So what are the chances that I'm going to be the deciding vote? You can feel that way. But when I see that 70,000 Rochesterians voted for the presidential, but only 20 or 30 are likely to vote locally, I think it's something else. I think it's harder to get information about local races and local candidates. Although I do hope that you're right, that seeing how important the presidential race just got people more excited. I mean, we saw that in Georgia with those Senate races where they had to have the runoff in January, and everyone was afraid the turnout would be low, but the turnout was really high. So I'm hoping that's going to be a message that it's going to happen other places, including here.
But I agree with Angie that I think that this is going to be a different year because it's not just about Warnock and Ossoff. It's not just about, it's about what's happened here locally, that people understand how important it is to hold our elected officials accountable in a way that we haven't before. And there's been a lot of very intentional and deliberate education from all sides. And I think people seeing what has happened and people's response to the things that have happened over the last year will motivate people in a way they haven't been motivated before.
Yeah, I agree. I think the intensity of the presidential elections, the tension that was around that, which is the same tension that we're experiencing locally, there's a lot at stake. You know, my only concern is how do we get out there to engage people of color to make sure that they are voting. You know, if anybody goes to the Monroe County website, and I mean, some of these decisions are literally made in less than tenths, right? So, you know, the difference between, you know, 600 votes and 650 votes can really, really, you know, change the dynamics in our community. And I think that if we're going to get any message out to people is that you're, especially in the local elections, your vote really does matter. Yeah, your vote can be the vote that really puts a candidate over the top. And hopefully people know that. I still worry that we have to do better in educating you know, our folks out there. I think the younger generation are more engaged as well. So, you know, I'm the mother of several kids under the age of 25, and they're voting. They have a lot of opinions. So I think that that's the dynamic that is also very different than I'm a Gen Xer. And, you know, I didn't grow up, I think, with that same intensity about going out to vote that I see this generation. I didn't talk about it with my friends. I guess that's what I'm saying, where I watch my 20-year-old really have this conversations about why is it important to vote with her peers. So that to me is very hopeful.
You know, it's really interesting because in my family, we were coming up, and I think it's a Black thing, right? Because you marched and the children got done with the hoses, all that narrative around voting was really salient in our house, right? So like, I remember the first time I voted. I voted for Jesse Jackson in New York City, and it took me to 11 o'clock at night to vote because the lines were so long. I mean, I remember, this is stuck in my head, but something that I want people to understand is that your vote does count. And as someone who's run for elected office and who lost by 200 votes, you know, I mean, that's real. you know, and what happened was, I remember everyone saying to me, we didn't think that that was possible that you could lose, right? So you're telling me that you wanted me, but you didn't want me enough to take the time out to go vote. And now you feel away, right? The way you guarantee that you don't feel away is you do your best. You know, when, like, I remember telling somebody, win, lose, or draw, I'm gonna leave it all on the field. And that's just in life, you know, but if I want something, I want to speak my voice to it. So I want to tell people, like, this does happen. You know, we don't, you know, and people say you get the government that you deserve. And I mean, I'm not saying this to be judgy in any way, but what I'm saying is that we really need to understand how much power we actually have. I mean, for me, it's like I tell people, if 1/10 of my let's say 1/4 of my local Facebook friends could have made a difference in that election. 1/10 of my local Facebook friends could have made a difference in that election.
Right.
You know, so let's really think about it. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm sad I lost. Well, no, what happened was God's will in my opinion. But my thing is, I want people to take a lesson from that, to say, hey, you know, this does matter.
Thank you for sharing that personal experience. That's a perfect example. And there's been a lot of close elections to look at recently. So elections can be very, very close, especially locally where the numbers are smaller. So there's one other dynamic going on that I think we have to specify here, and that is that in Rochester, pretty much most people who are registered to vote, who are registered in a party, are Democrats, which means that in November, Rochester voters will go to the polls and they will see Democrats to vote for. So those Democrats are going to be selected in a primary that's happening on June 22nd. And a lot of people do not understand this system. We know that because when Bernie Sanders was running for president, all kinds of people discovered that they weren't registered as Democrats, so they couldn't vote in the primary and they couldn't vote for him. The same is true here in Rochester. If you want to vote for Lovely Warren or against Lovely Warren,
or for someone else, not against
someone else, yeah.
Someone.
Your chance to do that is June 22nd. And if you miss that chance in June, you're not going to get the same chance in November. And likewise, we've got 5 city council seats up. Some of them are incumbents running for re-election, but there's a lot of challengers. There's 15 candidates for 5 seats. So you have a lot of choice, right? You can pick the exact kind of candidate you wish that we had. It's not like they're all the same. They are not all the same. There's a broad choice, but that is true on June 22nd, and it won't be true in November. In November, the 5 people who won the Democratic primary in June will be on the ballot, and you can vote for them, and that's a nice thing to do, but you won't have a lot of choice. And the same for the school board. I think, what do we have, 9 people for 3 seats, maybe? I'm not positive about that number. So only Democrats get to vote in June, and that is the important election, if you're a Democrat, is to vote in June in the primary. So that's a message that the league is just trying its best to hammer home in every way that we have, because it just slips by people.
And I think what we need to help people understand is that for Rochester, our general election is actually in June. We have a formality that happens in November, right? But let's just be real. By and large, our general election, the election that decides what's going to happen in our community, happens in June. And because when people hear primary, like for me, being from New York City, a primary was just that, a primary, right? So you go to primary, you do your primary things, but there was always, because there was so many people doing so many things, it was different. But here in Rochester, the election you've got to be at is what we call the primary, but it's really the general.
Yeah. We'll know who our leaders are going to be come June. And that's important. And I don't think a lot of people realize that or understand that. And people need to know which party they're registered under. That's a big one. I know even among our friends, even for the presidential election, this came up for a lot of people. They wanted to vote in the primaries, and then they found out, that they were not registered into a party. So I agree, Melanie. We will choose our leaders in June.
Yeah. I mean, and for good, bad, or indifferent, that's what it is. And we have to help people, because what's happened when you were in school, I don't know, like when I was growing up, when I was in school, they talk about what's it, the first Tuesday in November, our schools would close, you go in and you vote. So people have that narrative in their head, but the real election is like, is it June 26th? I think 22nd, June 22nd. So June 23rd, June 24th, we're going to know pretty much who it is. And if you want to have an impact on that, you need to be at that poll. And I hope we're going to share, like, I know that the deadline has not passed yet for new voters to be registered. Is that true, Barbara?
Okay, so yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. So the deadline to register is not passed. The deadline to register is May 28th. That's if you're mailing it. If you're delivering it in person, which is what the league does, you have till June 2nd. So think of it as the end of May. Now, what is passed is the date to change party. So if you're registered now, but you're not in a party, you're out of luck for June. Deadline for changing parties was February 14th. But if you're not a registered voter, you can register now and choose to be a Democrat, and you will be able to vote in June, which I find that weird, but that's New York State rules. So, whatever it is, it is. Yeah, so the league will be out registering voters from now till June 2nd. So you can look for us every Saturday. We're at the public market. We're going to be at La Marqueta as much as we can get there. And we've got a few other sites that we're setting up and being invited. So since we mentioned being in a party, I'm just going to take a minute to share my screen and show you, if you're not positive if you're registered or if you're in a party. I want to show how to do that. So let me see how to do this. Yes, I'm sharing my screen. And oops, not yet. All right, so let me come over here.
And while you're looking for that, there are a couple questions in the Q&A. There was one question: do Get Out the Vote campaigns help locally? Would meet and greet of candidates help? Voting holds more power in local elections, matters for all, but the impact is greater locally.
Those are really good points. I agree with all of them. So I would say that Get Out the Vote does matter locally, and we do it in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure some of you guys are involved in similar ways.
Get Out the Vote does help because people are highly relational, right? So, I mean, people, you get out there, you knock on doors, you get people to know you. They'll say, oh, I voted for you. I met you because you came to my door, right? And, and that's what people say. They'll say, I voted because you came to my door. I voted for so-and-so because I actually met them. So all of those Get Out the Vote things do work, because when you're talking to people, you can find out about voting.
Yeah, and the panelists are, the candidates are out working now, right? So answer your door if they knock on it, talk to them. They're ready to talk to voters. I met Angie at La Marqueta on Sunday, and Vince Felder was out there campaigning. So look around, they're out there. And it's good to have met your elected officials directly. All right.
There's another question. How are the platforms of the candidates promoted for consideration for prospective voters? I think that's done differently by different candidates. And because elections take money, different candidates do it different ways, depending on how much money you have to spend. Do you have enough money for a website? Do you have enough money to do multiple lit drops? Do you have money to do different things? So you know, it varies wildly from candidate to candidate. But the thing is that once you know who the candidates are, you know, start looking and seeing, you know, because it's a lot of times people who you see a lot is because they have money. It's not necessarily because they are the best candidate.
Right. So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the New York State Board of Elections. If you look yourself up, like I've typed my own information in there, you can do a search and it will tell you all kinds of information, right? So it shows that I'm registered, my name, shows my address, and it shows what party I'm in. So I'm registered as a Democrat, shows that I'm an active voter. It tells me all my different election districts, which is good because a lot of people don't know the number of their district. I have trouble remembering mine because I moved this year. So it's easy to verify that you are registered and what party you're registered in. Now, getting back to how you research candidates, which is such an interesting question, the League tries to help with that. So we are currently assembling a online voter guide. It's called vote411.org. That's a website. So it's not live yet because they just finalized the candidates 2 days ago. But soon you'll be able to go to vote411.org and it'll ask you what your address is, and based on that address, it'll tell you all the races that you'll find on the ballot. So it'll know whether you're a Democrat or not, and it knows what county ledge district you're in. And it shows you who you get the chance to vote for. And then we ask them a set of questions. So they're going to talk about their opinions on the questions we asked. And then they can also give links to their websites. A lot of candidates have websites these days. If you have a candidate that you know of that doesn't have a website and doesn't seem to have a presence, reach out to them, volunteer, help them. It's another excellent way to learn about elections. And, they really are small operations that will benefit from your attention, and you'll feel much better informed after doing that.
Absolutely.
I've had a lot of fun working with candidates.
Because it takes a lot, as someone who's had that experience, it takes a lot to run a campaign, and you need all kinds of people with all kinds of talent. So if you find somebody and you think that, oh, this person resonates with me, with what they want to do, and I want to get behind them, it's not always about money. A lot of times that candidates really need your skill. If you have a skill in a particular area, or if you just happen to know people, if you know people that you can talk to people about, the candidate you're supporting, there's a lot of ways you can support a candidate you believe in.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And, like you said a few minutes ago, if half of your Facebook friends had voted for you, that would have made the difference. So like, you bring your whole social network with you when you work for a candidate. If you get enthusiastic and decide this is a good person and we could really use someone like this, tell everyone you know about it, put it on your
because it's about getting people to vote,
media.
period. Like when I said, like, if people had voted for me, it's not like they voted for somebody else. They just didn't vote.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The turnout was abysmal, right? And people did not turn out because they thought it was a done deal. Like the whole thing, my vote's not going to count. She's not going to need my vote. And the vote, and people realize you need those votes. That's why we get out here and you talk to people, because your vote can make a difference. Just get out and do it. And if you see someone that a candidate that you believe in, get out and tell people, get out and vote. Because these local elections, the local elections are the ones that impact your daily lives.
Yeah, and I think that's how we can contribute. I mean, I find myself having conversations with whoever I can. I'll ask people, are you registered to vote? And people will say sometimes, oh, it's too many people, I don't know who to vote for. And then I will say, well, what are the issues that are important to you, right? Because that's where you start. There's certain things that you feel very strongly about, and you need to just do some research and find out where do those people stand in around, those issues. But I agree, Melanie. I think, social media can be such an equalizing component, right? Because it's free.
Yeah.
Most of a lot of people that run for office, they're usually well known in our community and have a great following already. You know, you could have up to 5,000 people
Mhm.
as part of your social network that you can really leverage. And that's also a great direct line to some of these candidates. You know, I watch it now with some of the candidates, people go right in the comments and say, well, what do you think about this? Or
Yes.
what do you feel about that? Or elaborate what you would do, right, if you were in office. So I think as an equalizing platform, but I think we need to do more educating with our with our population and our voters to say you don't have to wait until they knock on your door. I mean, that's ideal, right? But you don't have to wait until they knock on your door. We have this whole social media platform.
You know, go and see if their Facebook page, check out their, go and check out their Twitter, check out their Instagram, see what they're saying. And something that you can do is that these people were people before they ran for office.
Yes.
So especially the new ones, see what they were saying before they started running for office. Because you can scroll back a ways and see what these people really believe, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, that's real and it's free and you can learn some amazing things about people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually really informative. I follow most of the candidates.
Yeah, I do too, just because, you know, I'm curious. I want to know. And I think the other thing that we also need to look at, and it's who are the people who have delivered outside of the political realm for our community, right? Because you may wake up tomorrow and say, I want to run for office and not ever done a thing for the community. But there's a lot of good people out there that by looking at their social media platform, you could see the level of involvement, whether they are people who have the capability of bringing people together to solve complex problems, whether they've delivered, even if at a small scale within their own neighborhoods, because I think that that's also important. I think people idealize what being a politician is, and there's a very defined set of skills that you
Skills.
to have, because you're constantly negotiating something or going against the force of some source. So that's something that I've enjoyed as I follow some of the more non-traditional people that are running, right? Because I want to see, have you had longevity in your commitment? Have you delivered for your community? And that doesn't need to be in some big old, way. But those things I think are more visual through their social media than they are through any campaign information that you're going to send me in my house, because I'm going to see, like you said, I'm going to see who you were before you ran for office.
Right. And the thing is, you get to see people's work ethic, right? And their social media. Like, you know, if you see people who like there's let's say there's somebody who's running and say, well, I don't know what they did. But if you go back in the last year, they're doing, you know, feeding the community, clothing drive, and they're doing these, and it's just these very specific things. But that means that person works hard. Because for each of those events, there's a whole crap ton of work that has to happen to make those things happen. You know, and really look at those things and take those things into account when you're looking at a new candidate. What have they done? And they may not have done it for something that covers the whole city. They may have done it for their block. They may have done it for their neighborhood, but it shows that they're minded about their community, however they defined it.
And another thing that you'll see from their social media platforms, they've all got lots of followers. So if they post something, they're going to get reactions from people, and you'll see how they respond when people disagree with them or when people agree with them. You'll get a sense of how they are with people, which is very worthwhile.
And I think it's a very important component, right? How are you with people? I mean, this is a role where you have to be courageous, right? So you always have to have the courage, right? To stand, and I'm not a politician, but in my role, I ground myself I stand with what's right? And based on that anchor really decides who comes around me. And I don't fluctuate from my values when it comes to that, right? So sometimes you have to have the courage to say, this is how I feel, even if it's not the most popular decision, but at least that gives you insight that this candidate is consistent, that they're not going to sway like the weather in Rochester, right? We go from summer to winter. A lot of candidates are like that. You see the people putting pressure, and all of a sudden they quickly change their whole perspective. To me, as a voter, that's important. I need to know that I can trust you to carry a decision. I think also humility, right? The ability to go publicly and say, you know what, guys, I know more today than what I did yesterday. And this is why I've changed my position, right?
Right.
And being able to bring your followers along with you as to how are you kind of rationalizing and going about those decisions, not getting defensive in social media about the post that you made last year. You obviously know more today than you did last year.
Right.
You just have to articulate that to the people that you vote. One that is very important to me, and this is just because I know how challenging it is to do community work and community organizing, is your ability to influence others and bring people together.
Yes.
Because anybody who thinks that they're going to go into political space and just go like the wild rebel and do all this work alone, is going to hit a very frustrating wall. Your main job, like any leader in this community, is to influence other people to see things from your perspective. And that to me requires an energy that I can trust. So one of the things that I often watch for is how you talk to other people and the level of respect and the level of courtesy that you have for each other, because to me that's an indicator that you can easily turn on anybody, right? And then become this like person that you're like, I can't believe I voted for this person. So I think and that's why I'm not a fan of dirty politics, because I think dirty politics to me really reveal who you are in the inside, because I do believe that at most everyone comes into this work with great intentions, right? And we all have different levels of information. And part of it is how do we negotiate that? And we see that in our space all the time, right, Melanie, in our fight as leaders and non-for-profits. And then we're constantly negotiating with each other to make things happen for the community. But to me, that's important, that humility, that courage, and that courtesy. Courtesy, I could still say what I gotta say. And Melody's a great example of how you do that, right? Melody never walks away from a conversation leaving half of herself behind, but everybody loves Melody. And that's why they love her, right? Because of that integrity. She can say what she needs to say to you, but I'm not walking around feeling, oh, that Melody, she rough, she totally.
There's a way to do all things, right? And I could say the same thing about Angie, right? My thing is, and what you can do when you see how people do, like with Angie, if Angie's not in the room, and I know Angie's typically there, I say, when I hear something, I say, what would Angie say? Right? And then I will say it, or Angie will do the same for me, right? And because they're people that you can trust. And how do you come to trust people? Because Angie, I'm not saying that Angie's God, but Angie's like God. She's the same yesterday, today, and forever. No, there's a saying that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Angie's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Like every time you see her, she's consistent, right? And that's what I seek to be, is that I tell people, like, look, you may not like my brand of crazy, but it's consistent, right? I'm the same ever since you've met me. And, but that's what you look for. Do you look for somebody that you can pretty much bet what they're going to do, if they're going to stand for right. Like someone said, I may not always agree with what Melanie says, but I know that she believes that she's standing on the side of right. And that's what I'm going to look for a candidate.
Let's change the subject a little bit. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in here that deserve answers. So one question is, how can people register to vote? So that's pretty easy. So there's several ways. There's always several ways. The most common way is to get a voter registration form and fill it out. Now you can do that. You could go to the Board of Elections in the county building and ask for one, or you could go to your local public library and ask for one, or I don't know if the DMV offices are open to the public right now. They always have them. Almost any kind of government office is going to have one. If you're at
Like the
DHS.
libraries, all those places have them.
Yeah. So you fill the form out. It takes about a minute and a half, and you get it back to the Board of Elections. The League of Women Voters takes them with us everywhere we go, and so you can fill them out with us, and we'll make sure they get deposited. You can do it online. Well, okay. First, you can, if you have a printer, you can go online and print off a form, which you can then mail in. It is possible to register to vote online if you have an account with the DMV. And so if you have a driver's license or you own a car that's registered, then you do have an account with the DMV. I'm going to say it's not the easiest thing in the world to navigate the DMV website to register to vote, but it is technically possible. So those are your main options. So another good question that we've got coming in, let's talk about the powers of these different offices. Okay, so we've mentioned, let me go through what's on the ballot in June. We've got the mayor is on the ballot. We've got 2 candidates for mayor, Lovely Warren and Malik Evans. We've got the school board, I think 3 members of the school board. We've got quite a few candidates for that. We've got the city council. We've got 5 candidates, 5 spots,
5
15
seats.
candidates. We've also got judges. There's going to be 3 county court judges decided, and there is a primary for the judges. That's not that common, but this year there is a Democratic primary. And then we've got the county legislature. So all 29 members of the county ledge are up for election. And this is kind of new. This is where I think, Angie, you might be right that the times are changing. There are primaries in a number of the county elections, county ledge seats. So all of the seats in the city, I think, have primaries, and a couple in the suburbs have primaries. So let me get you guys to comment on the importance. Oh, and then there's one other thing. It's not going to be on the primary, but the sheriff is up for election this year. There's no challenger, so I guess he'll win. But anyway, when we're talking about what powers different groups have, he might come up because we're talking so much about policing, and it's a different part of the policing infrastructure. So talk to me about, say, city council and county ledge and mayor. How do the powers of those interact with each other? Most people can tell you who the mayor is. I don't know how many people know how many city council members, and I don't know how many people know who their county ledge representative is. So how big a deal are those, the city council and the county ledge, and what are they important for? Because they have different powers.
Yeah, I mean, they're very important. So I think one of the things that, people need to understand is this is how, local policy can be defined, and this is what a lot of the pressure now, right, that we're seeing coming through, let's say, for example, city council and the, with the policing and some of the things that are happening with the PAB and some of the incidents that we've had. So these are very, very important elections. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people do, especially in the ledge. I feel like if you live in the city, you may know your city council member, especially if it's not a large person and it's more in your community. But I do feel that with the county ledge, people just really don't know. And I don't think people understand the differences between the two and the role that the county plays in the city. And I know that, that is critical because, one thing that I remind people is the county is the holder of all of the services that most city residents receive. So when you talk about your Department of Health and Human Services, and under that, it's a whole bunch of things.
Right. Under that is, look, let's lay it out. It's the Department of Health. It's the Department of Mental Health. It's Department of Human Services, which is you have OCFS, the Office of Children and Family Services. You have Department of Social Services. You have all of these things these are all county.
Yes.
And they're all under that one big umbrella.
Then you have the DMV. Then you have, so there's a lot of power in the county that is going to influence large segments of especially Black and brown people.
Yes.
So I think that, if you're going to learn anything, is learn that the county has a lot of power and a lot of influence and is really in control of a lot of the resources that the city receive in a way that the mayor may not be,
right.
Whoever holds the mayor's office. And I don't think people really understand that. So I think sometimes we give heat to the city administration, really not understanding that this is the power that lies within the county. This is the big discussion now with this whole, FIT team and the other team and the mental health response. I've said for a very long time, those resources are centralized under the county. Thank you, city, right, for taking the initiative and creating your own team. But that's where all those resources are, in the county, not in city government. So I think knowing that the county is an important influence, therefore you have to really pick people that are strong, because the other dynamic with the county is that it's not just the city-led people, right? You're opening it up now to a larger form of government. So if you don't have the right unity, the right ability to communicate, the right ability to negotiate, city residents can really be at a loss of resources because they're going to be overpowered by the voices outside of the county. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that people in the city need to learn, that they are subject to the Monroe County legislature.
And the fact of the matter is, when in a county, when you have a county government, the county has what's called a county seat. Rochester is the county seat for Monroe County, which means that's why the county office building is in downtown Rochester. That's why all these things are. But the thing is, a lot of times when you think the county, you think the suburbs. But the city is part of Monroe County. There is no donut that we fall into. We need to use our voice on the county level, because the way it plays out is that the county represents the suburbs. No, the county represents all 750,000 people, which includes the 210,000 or so who live in the city of Rochester. And so we need to exercise our power as city residents to make sure that we vote, in the county, because that impacts us deeply.
So speaking of times changing, I've seen things in the county ledge in the last year that I don't know if they've ever happened before. So, there's always been a Democratic caucus and a Republican caucus, and understandably enough, they usually have different ideas about how to run things. But this year, the Democratic caucus fractured, and several of the city representatives on the county ledge who are Democrats were voting with the Republicans. Do you guys have anything to say about that? I have just found it.
Melanie go first.
Shoot, in for a penny, in for a pound. Yes, I will. Because you know I will, right? My thing is, when we look at who represents us, I'm gonna say this. When we look at who represents us, we need to see who truly represents us. Do they sell the farm for individual gain? Or do they stand for the people that they serve? Yeah, I said it, right? My thing is, when we look at, and when you're going to see about voting, this is something else. If you're voting for if you're looking at incumbents, that people who are already holding an office, you look at their voting record. The votes that people make are matters of public record. You can look and see how they voted on particular matters. And if you believe that there's a group that is, let's just say, all right, I'm open. I'm a registered Democrat. Okay, my mama was a Democrat, my grandma was a Democrat, my great-grandma, my grandma was a Democrat, because we couldn't vote before that. But the thing is that If I know I'm a Democrat because of my values. If I see that someone who's representing me is voting with people who do not stand for my values or are caucusing, what the word caucusing means is that you're standing with somebody. That when you caucus, you vote as a block. And if you're caucusing with someone, like on the federal level, Bernie Sanders is a Democrat, but for a while I think he was an independent, but he caucused with Democrats. There was a gentleman named Joe Lieberman who was an independent, but he caucused with Democrats. That means he voted with the Democrats. And so my thing is, you need to figure out, are the people who you represent caucusing with the people who are standing by what you believe in, are standing for the things that you believe in? You know, let's just because the thing is, we do not have permanent alliances. We have permanent interests.
Yes.
As a community.
Yeah.
As a community, we have permanent interests. And if you have people who are serving our permanent interests, that's the people that we vote for. Period.
Yeah.
Look, I said it. Y'all didn't say it.
Yeah, I know.
And if thoughts and opinions expressed by Melanie are Melanie's alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing with Angie's. You know, I think too, there is this other tension that I don't think we always talk about. I mean, I think, you know, for those of us who are not in the political space, you know, our fight is social justice.
Yes.
And that sometimes, you know, requires, you know, some isolation from things that you normally wouldn't, right? Because you're going to stand for that greater good and that greater value. So for that reason, I think we've seen a lot of this fractioning. I think, you know, we have some people that are really, they will not budge in some of their ideals and values. And then, you know, you have others that may be more flexible around them. But I personally feel that a lot of that is driven by how you view as a person of color, for me, how I view as a person of color, how those decisions are going to uplift me in the racial justice movement, because we're looking for liberation. We're not looking for approval. We're not looking to pass, you know, small legislation. We're looking to systemically take down the structure so that we can give people of color true liberation. And I think, you know, we make those decisions even within our roles about who we're going to stand with and who we're not. Just at times, that's the only reason that I use to make us a decision. I could love you as a person,
that's absolutely.
But if I ultimately don't think that you're willing to take the step or die and not, you know, cut your nose to, you know, sometimes you're going to have to take that risk. Just for the revolution, There's
times that there's a hill that you need to die, you need to be willing to die on, right? For liberation, for me. People know my thing is healing for the village. That's the hill that I die on daily.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to stand by people who will die, who are willing to die on a hill for us.
Okay, I want to shift the questions a little bit now to the mayor and the city council. So we talked about the county ledge. That's where a lot of the money is controlled.
Barbara, before you do that, I want to make sure that we look at the question about the role of endorsements and the power of the endorsements on the elections.
Oh,
we don't have to do it now, but I want to make sure that we see it.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so the mayor has a lot of power. For one thing, the mayor appoints the police chief. And the mayor appoints a lot of important people who administer all the city departments. The mayor proposes legislation, engages in lots of negotiations, like with developers, because the city has to approve a lot of things that people want to build or do in the city. Talk to me now about the city council and what their power is vis-a-vis the mayor. And I'm going to say that I've seen something in the last year that I never saw before. It seemed to me up until very recently, every vote I ever heard of on the city council was unanimous. I never saw some people voting for and some people voting against. So it seemed like all the discussion had been had behind closed doors and then they all approved it. But this year that hasn't been the case. There's been several really important votes where it's been divided. People have been willing to vote no on something. And then things have gotten rehashed and changed considerably as a result of that. So talk to me, what has the city council usually done, and what are their powers, and what do you think they need to do in the next few years?
You know, the city, the analogy I draw, the city council's relationship to the mayor is the relationship of a board of an organization to its CEO. The mayor is the CEO of the municipality, and the city council is their board. The only difference between the organizational structure and the political structure is that all the positions in the political structure are independently elected, but the interaction is very similar. Do you agree, Angie?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, those are relationships that, going with that analogy, Melanie, there's times with your board where you have a difference of opinion. But you're always working towards that middle ground, and it's good to have a difference of opinion. I mean, I don't want a board that says yes to every bright idea that I have, because they may not be the right bright ideas. I need somebody to say, hey, Angie, have you really thought that through? Is that really what you want to do? To me, I just go back that there is a way to do that, to make sure that we're having a meaningful outcome, because resistance just for the sake of resistance without no outcome, it's we have to push towards outcomes. And sometimes that means having, a conversation on the side, or an understanding, right? I need to understand what is it that you're seeking. But if those conversations are not happening, then I think it's hard. Based on that analogy, right? I couldn't function as the CEO if my entire board opposed me, or at least more than half of them did. I mean, I would, might as well quit and walk away, because I wouldn't be able to really influence. I will be overpowered every single time. So great analogy.
And I think it's important that, people understand that the level of power that the city council holds. And I remember someone telling me about talking about negotiations when you're looking at a candidate. What's a good law, or what's a good piece of legislation? Something that can get 5 votes, which means it gets enough votes to pass, right? And I didn't like that when I heard it, because I thought it was very cynical, right? But as I've been in the shoe, right? Now that I've been in the shoe, I get it, right? And so my thing is that the city council is able to bring things forward. So, I mean, the biggest thing I think about is the police accountability board, and the role that city council played in bringing that to the fore, and that the fact that it came to a referendum, and that the residents of the city were able to vote. And I think it was like 75% or a really high number of people, higher than what they thought, actually voted for us to have a police accountability board, But the thing is that there's all different types of things, but we have to understand what they do. Like you said, they appoint position, like the mayor appoints positions, county exec, but a lot of these positions have to come before city council, I believe, to be approved, or
Right, and the
county led.
budget has to, and so it's who they are and what they stand up for. Oh, welcome, Ricardo. It's so good to see you. Is really important. So I'm not even criticizing people who always voted for whatever was proposed.
Mhm.
If they were behind the scenes saying, oh, look, Mayor, I think you need to consider this. Have you thought about that? That's what they do. And that's why we need people with solid judgment and sound foundations to be on the city council.
Political positions.
Okay, I got a couple of other questions to throw in here. One person asks, are either Melanie or Angie running for office? I'm going to answer that. No, they are not. And the league would not put candidates on in a forum like this. We have candidate forums where we treat them very equally. We wouldn't get one candidate in.
Absolutely not.
talk like this. Okay, so we have another question about political endorsements. Like we've got, we got unions that make endorsements. We've got various organizing, like Citizens Action and some of these nonprofits making endorsements. Can you make a comment on how important those are?
You want to go, Melanie?
Sure, I'll go. I think that political endorsements are important to the people who are part of those bodies. Like, for an example, if I'm a member of 1199, and I'm putting it out, I'm not a member of 1199, but if I was a member of 1199, and I know that what my issues are as a worker in the service worker in the industry, I would believe what my union, if my union endorses these candidates, I believe that those are people who stand for the same things that I stand for as part of the union. So it would help me to give me the attention to look at these people. It may not be I automatically vote for them, but I'll give them a second look or a third look or a fourth look based upon the fact that if I trust my union and my union is saying that these people are okay. And that's with any organization that does endorsements. If I am, if I believe in the work and the values of Citizen Action, and Citizen Action says they're endorsing these people, I said, let me look at these people and give them another look. So I do believe that they do make a difference.
Right, because it's hard work for voters to do the research. When you have 15 candidates and you have to choose 5, like that's a lot of work. So if you look at organizations that you're familiar with and they've done the work, they've probably interviewed them and really checked their records, you can save yourself work. So I think they're influential.
I think you can always find out what the process is they use to endorse people.
Yes.
And find out, because that stuff is public knowledge. You can find out what were the questions that they had to answer, what were their answers. You can find out those things if you want to know, to find out, how they came to endorse the people they did.
Yeah. I know that in the federal stage, endorsements are a little bit, different, right? Because you can have someone who really does not have the will of the majority really drive through their endorsement, the political forum. But I agree that when you look at the endorsement, you look at their issues, right? So you can go to their website and see what is important to this group that has endorsed, and that does some of the homework for you to know how this the person running for office links and aligns. So I think it definitely cuts the work that you would have to do as an individual voter. I know for me, when there's people that I don't really know, like I go and I look at their voting record, there's certain non-negotiables for me when it comes to people that I'm going to vote for. And there's some people that I've completely loved and adored, personally met them, thought they were the greatest thing. But, there was that one thing that you voted no on that for me is a non-negotiable, that I feel that if I vote for you, kind of, outcast my whole like integrity and being. So I think when political groups or endorsement groups get behind people, it's a quick way to gather that message without you having to do, what I would do, which is go try to look at your voting record,
right?
See how you voted against certain issues.
And I think that's particularly helpful for new candidates who don't necessarily have a voting record, because the endorsement process that they have to go through. And if you find out about the endorsement process, you can say, did they ask the right questions? So you can do all this and it can cut your work way down. But the key is to be an informed voter, however you get there.
Yeah. Ricardo, feel free to jump in here if you have some comments or questions you want to share.
I believe that the endorsements are promote advertising for you. I don't believe they increase votes. Some unions, their members can't even vote. They don't even live like in the city. You know what I'm saying? So how much power do they really have? But what I wanted to touch on is that the importance of the vote. There's a myth and rumor out that our vote don't count. But if we take a real look at the last 10 years or so, vote has counted unbelievably more than it's ever counted. Go back and look at, we elected Obama got elected.
Mhm.
Lovely Warren got elected. That was a big
Mhm.
deal when she got elected.
first
She
time,
was
yeah.
the underdog. She was the underdog against Tom Richards.
Mhm.
Donald Trump got elected.
That's
Nobody
what I was
believed
gonna
that.
say.
Yeah,
That
Donald
was-
Trump got
that-
elected.
Yeah, that was a big deal. So we have to know that
You have to
our
vote.
vote does
You have to
count.
vote.
It
Yeah.
really does count. And I'm here to tell you that I got elected. That's a big deal. And if we come out and vote in numbers,
Mhm.
everybody is going to support our issues, because most politicians, that's all they care about is your vote.
Mhm.
And if they see that you're coming out, then they're going to start addressing your issues to get the vote. And we really need to come out. We need to act like this is a presidential year.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
my
you
message.
hit it right in the head about, and that's what I was trying to get to with interest groups, that groups that have the ability to endorse don't always have the people's best interest. I mean, there's some great examples at the federal level, right?
Yes.
Of huge national endorsing organizations. They don't, they're not thinking
But
about
they
black
don't
and brown
represent their rank
folks.
and
They
file.
don't, so I agree with you, right? That is also very important, right? Who's endorsing? Are these people actually people who work in the city, who spend money in the city, especially when you're thinking about city government?
Yes.
For me, it's really important when you think about city government that you are aware of what truly impacts and is influencing city government. And I think for the school board as well, another one that I would like to talk about a little bit is judges.
Yes.
We need to really, with what's happening in our world today, for the past 4 years, every judge underneath us, I almost say every judge was switched. So you got to remember that there's always this, I always say one force is met with another force. So when we begin to lose power in one area, there's this gain of power in the other area, right? And we've seen that with the amount of Republican judges that were, nominated in the court. That matters when you're taking cases like Daniel Prude to front of a judge, when you're taking, those values are going to get played out in that courtroom. And I feel like we don't pay enough.
As much as that impacts our community, we should pay way more attention. And I will move that out to the district attorney.
Yeah.
It's an elected position.
Yeah.
And the thing is, people say, well, that's a prosecutor. I said, but they have great power over who they prosecute and how.
Yeah.
Right. And the way that impacts our community, and to give a really real world example. Okay. Let's say I get pulled over on a pretextual thing for having a tree on my window. And I get hit with some kind of violation, right? Something happens. I get to an argument with the officer, the officer's whatever. I'm just making it up. This has not happened to me. Once I get arrested, right? Depending whether I get arrested for this and I get charged for this depends on the values of police. Whether I get prosecuted for this same crime is up to the DA. The DA can stop it at that point, then say, well, we think that such and such is going on here. We're choosing not to prosecute. So you want to have a DA. So the DA plays a role just like the police chief, just like all these other people up and down the chain, just like the judge. So if we want to make sure that we see people with our values, we got to go all the way up and down the chain.
Yeah. And, and that's something that I've recently just learned about. I think we've had a lot of different defining cases land in the Supreme Court, right? Where we're thinking, but those things went through a whole process before they got there. And that's where the power is. The power is always with the people, and it's always at the ground level. And we have to be very mindful about who we put in office, making sure that we hold our officials accountable for the decisions that they're making. but that takes education, you know, on our part. And I have that conversation with like a lot of people, you know, people will say to me, well, I don't like so-and-so, or I don't like so-and-so. And my job is, I'm not going to convince you who to like, but I want you to articulate to me why you do not. And if you cannot articulate why you're not, why either you're supporting or not supporting a candidate, then what that says to me is that there's some homework you need to do. And we need to really see the responsibility in our vote, right? That's the power that we bring. And in order for us to execute that power successfully, we have to be informed voters. So how do we become informed? How do we help others become informed? But judges to me is like a big deal, because if anybody's been paying attention what was happening with at the federal level, you know, that carpet got pulled right from underneath us. And that to me creates an issue. We're talking about the criminal justice system. So as a Black and brown person, judges need to really, really matter.
Absolutely.
Which then leads to the next question. How do you know which judge to vote for? So we're having a primary. We've got 4 choices for 3 seats. It's pretty hard to feel like a really informed voter on judge seats. They're not allowed to campaign in the same way. I mean, I've met judicial candidates and heard people ask them tough questions, and they're not allowed to always answer them. So do you have any hints for us for how to be good voters on judicial races?
You know, I think once again, this is where social media can really come in handy. I mean, I agree. I was surprised. I didn't always realize that they couldn't comment and they couldn't campaign. I really learned that like several elections ago, and I was completely shocked. But then there's some local issues that sometimes occur that you should watch out for, the amount of people. One thing that I always look out for is the difference in prosecution, right, between Black and brown people and white people, right? So I'm not going to vote for a judge who has the record that every single white person that went in front of them for a DWI went off to some 12-week class, but yet every person of color. I think that's where it is hard with judges, and you may have to do some research and get an idea of how they're presiding over their court.
Yeah.
I've also seen some judge decisions come through where I actually do know the individual. I'm like, whoa, like I don't understand that, right? And that allows, I think, social media again to understand some of the restrictions, right, that our laws bring, which leads you to things that you need to change, right? Because they're functioning within the law, but the law itself is not set up to benefit, the individual person of color. I think we saw that played out with the recent evictions, right? Where everybody was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Well, there's a lot structurally that needs to change in order for even the best of judges, right,
to be able to move and do what they need to do. And something that I do, and I do like you said, Angie, look how people have ruled and look at their rates. But not for nothing, I talk to lawyers. This is a town. We pretend like we're a city, but we're a town. And ask if you have any friends who are lawyers. If you have asked them, they'll tell you privately. Ask privately. Don't go putting people out on blast, but ask privately. Do you know about Judge so-and-so? How do they do this? And we know what our issues are. When I heard that, like in the last election, I want to see, what the judges that were the last set of judges. I went and asked every lawyer friend I had, what do you think of this judge? And I asked them very specific questions, because the lawyers are the ones who go up before the judges. Mm-hmm. and they talk. I look at how they rule. I look at this, and you'll hear people say, well, they're tough, but they're fair. And that's what you want in a judge. You want fair, right? Or you say, some people say, well, this one is this way, this one is this way. This is how they are and how they operate their courtroom, because no one knows better about that than lawyers.
I don't agree with the terms the term limits that they have on any level. The federal level, they have lifetime appointments. I think that's way, way too much. And locally, there's judges, 10-year terms. That's too long. They're allowed, I mean, they can make a whole lot of mistakes the first 4 or 5 years and still have 5 years for you to forget about that. I believe that needs to be reduced on all levels, local and definitely on the federal level. That lifetime appointment stuff is ridiculous.
Okay. So,
And that go for the school board too. A school board should not be, you should not be able to stay on there forever.
No, term limits are a thing,
Yeah.
and they should be a thing. You know, you should not, and look, I'll say it, you know, I don't care at this point. You should not be able to be on school board for 20 some odd years.
Yeah, that's,
You know, because it's like, no, we need, that's how you get fresh blood, fresh ideas, new ideas. Yeah, y'all know I don't care, right? So it's like, we need to be able to change things up. You know, you give somebody else a turn. That's how we move leadership. That's how we move things forward. And I think term limits are something in all these aspects that we really need to possibly think about.
Yeah. And I
So-
think, you know, succession, building up other leaders. I mean, there's a lot of frustration in some of the younger generation, right? That, you know, and I always talk about this as the Gen Xer, right? If
Yes.
you know, we patiently waited for our turns, and now the millennials are here, and you know, Generation C, and they're ready to go. But I agree. I think term limits than anything. I feel the same way about non-for-profits. I mean, and I joke about it with my staff all the time, right? There's just a time where you just gotta go, right?
Yes.
And you just need new voice, new energy. You really do it the service to the community. You know, everything has a season. So I feel that way about, you know,
Absolutely.
leadership roles within our community, you know.
And what we know is when something stays stagnant too long, when the change does come, the change can kill it.
right.
You know, I mean, you see that happen, and so we want to make sure that we are bringing up new leadership. I mean, that's as a community, you know, we always want to say we want to foster young leadership, but that's how you do it. You move over and let them come in and lead.
All right, so we are getting short on time. I think we've got time for maybe one more question or comment. So when I'm out registering voters, I hear all the excuses for why people don't vote. So let me throw some of them at you. We've already talked about my vote doesn't count. There are people who tell me they don't vote because they're boycotting the elections. They think that in the past, nobody's listened to them, and therefore they're not going to, you know, legitimize the system by participating in it. So what do you say to someone like that? I'm sure you've met them too.
Oh my goodness, they were all over the place in the presidential election. I feel like I spoke with so many people that said, I don't like neither, so I'm not gonna vote. You know, what I say to people is if we all took that stance, you know, we would be screwed. We have an ethical and moral responsibility. And just, you know, we have to do our homework, right? And sometimes it is unfortunate. Sometimes you feel like you're picking you know, the worst, you know, maybe two things that you will consider evil, but not doing anything to me feels irresponsible. And I heard a lot of that in the presidential election. I mean, people said, you know, I'm not voting. I don't like Biden and I don't like Trump, so I'm not voting for either. And you could have been that vote that could have decided the election. I don't know.
Do you think people are going to listen to him more because they didn't vote? That's the thing that
Well,
bothers
and
me.
that's, I think, the point that you try to, and that's the stuff that we have to counter, because I think people rationalize that. Like, people will get into full-blown arguments about why,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna go put my name on the ballot. Although personally, I'd rather you do that than not vote at all.
Right.
But choosing not to decide is a decision, right? Like you're choosing not to participate. in the election process. And I know a lot of people will say, and then you can't complain. And it's, you know, and in some ways, there's people that choose not to vote, right? Because both options are not liable according to them, are usually some of the ones that are very vocal. Well, you have to participate in the process.
Right. You can't have it both ways. You don't get to say that I don't like this and I don't like this, and then you don't participate in the process to make it better. And I say that sometimes you can't have it both ways. You've got to be in it to win it.
Right.
Like you said, Angie, people say that they don't vote. And I think you said, Barbara, do you think people will listen to you more because you didn't vote? They listen to the people who vote.
And to people who feel like voting doesn't really change anything or it doesn't count, I like to say, yeah, it's a very small contribution you're making when you show up to vote. You're right, it's not huge, but I think it's a gateway drug to participating in our democracy. That, once you decide you're going to vote, first of all, you start paying attention to the issues, you start following the news, you pay attention to who's doing what and who says what, and then you start talking to other people and influencing them, and pretty soon you're going to run into these candidates. Next time you're at La Marqueta, you're going to meet one and you're going to get involved. And not everybody wants to really be in electoral politics, but you start thinking, well, what would it take to make my community better? And there's so many ways that you can get involved civically. And to me, they're complementary with voting. So voting it's a small thing, but it's a thing that you need to do. And I think once people take the step, they take another step and another step. So I try to get everyone to vote all the time. Of course, that's why I do what I do.
It is. Once you get started, you'll vote, and then you start paying attention to who's running. Like you said, I'll go to and I'll just make it up. I went to La Marqueta, and I met this woman named Angie Delgado. Yo, she had all these great ideas. Listen. I don't know how you find her, but her name is Angie Delgado, and she may be at La Marqueta again. But she has this dark hair and this really cute outfits on, and you go find her, right? But that's how you get excited. People get excited when your friends get excited. And that's how you engage. I mean, it starts as simply as that.
Yeah, and I have to say, in my early 20s, I was one of those people that, and I talk about it openly. Like, I don't think I voted probably until I was in my late 20s. I was a single mom. I was working 2 jobs. I was going to school full time. I really did not think any of these people that were running for, I didn't see them in my neighborhood. They didn't come and talk to me. They weren't in my struggle. Therefore, I couldn't see what was in what they were going to do for me, right, as a person in that moment. And one of the things that I learned, and this is something that I make my kids, like my daughter was in college at UB, and I said, if you did not put an absentee voting ballot, you are going to get in that car and you're going to drive an hour and you're going to come vote in Rochester. I mean, that's how strongly I feel. Like, I harass people around election time. And that changed to me, because these people do make decisions that impact my life every day, right? City government is going to decide whether, if I was a single mom, how many first home buyer program opportunities I may have. My wage. I mean, there's just a ton of impact that, what that interaction with the police is going to look like with my son. But I think in the moment you convince, and I think it's also culture. So just going back to something that Melody said, she grew up in a home where this was the language. I grew up in a home where, we didn't talk about politics. This wasn't a discussion that we had at the table. To be honest, John, I don't even know if my grandparents voted. Like, it wasn't anything we talked about. And growing up with my friends, there wasn't anything that we've talked about. So I think there is that, they're here, they're disconnected. But this is where I would say, once again, social media is such an equalizing for those who do have access, right? Because let's say you don't know Ricardo Adams, but you happen to run into that BOE meeting online, right? And then you see how he's out there articulating what you've been trying to articulate as a parent in the district. And then all of a sudden, Ricardo, Melanie, whoever's running, is not like this big political figure. It's a person who has had the same challenges. This is why they came into this realm and are willing to go into the political arena. But for me, that's what it was. I was too busy working, paying bills, raising 4 kids by myself. Ricardo, who, Melody, who.
But that speaks to the process itself.
Okay,
Right.
I'm gonna jump in here. We are out of time.
Oh,
I want to thank you all. This has been really fun. Ricardo, I'm sorry we didn't get more of your time, but we'll have you on our next panel and people get a chance to hear from you. I'm going to share my screen and put up a slide that gives you information about how to contact us. Here we go, share screen. Yes. So there's a few other things I want to say about the league. As I said, we're always trying to help people be informed voters. So we are working to organize candidate debates between the candidates. We have them well in the works for the city council representatives and also for the school board. I know we're working on getting the mayoral candidates to have a debate that we would help sponsor. And we may well end up sponsoring some county ledge debates. So if you want to learn more about those and make sure you don't miss them, you can go to our website and sign up for our email newsletter, and you'll get invitations to all of those. Most of them, I think all of them are going to be on Zoom this year, so they're you can do them from the comfort of your home. And soon we'll have vote411.org live, and that'll help you do your research on your candidates as well. So once again, thanks to everyone for coming out. And our next seminar is 2 weeks from tonight, and the topic is going to be about voting rights for people who may have felony records. A lot of people think that you can't ever vote again if you had a felony, but that is not at all true. And we're going to have 3 people who have a lot of personal experience to talk about why it's important for people to regain their voting rights and exercise them. All right, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you, everybody.